Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, ModzvilleUSA, back with another video. Today we got something very special, very neat. We've got this primo Ps2 slim build here with a crystal chip installed, as well as the brand new Retrogem Gem from PixelFX. This is not going to be much of a how-to video. I'm just going to do the build. I'm going to comment here and there where I feel necessary, and yeah, we're just going to bust it out. So we've got this down at the bottom, nice and clear. Got the 3D printed bracket from Gusse. I'm going to have that linked below. A lot of work went into this, so yeah, I'm very happy with the results, and let's go through the footage. We're going to put this together. We're going to start with the crystal chip, move on to the Retrogem Gem. It's running the MC2 SIO from Helder for games. Eventually I'll do some kind of IDE mod, either the M2 board or the SD card mod, and yeah, memory cards handling. I'm using FreeMake boot to boot OPL, but the crystal chip does have its own boot manager, which I'll show you in a bit. And yeah, this is a pretty neat PS2. Let's get into it. But first, a word from today's sponsor. Big ups to today's sponsor, PCBWAY. If you're in the market to get some PCBs manufactured, 3D print work done, or CNC machining, PCBWAY has you covered. My personal favorite is the retro stuff section under shared projects. If you find a project you like, you can order one directly from the page, with the choice of having it assembled as well. The creators of these projects even get a cut from your purchase. Click the link in the description if this interests you. Now, let's get back to the show. Okay, we're watching this at 2x speed. These are the parts for everything we got going on here. We got the sealed crystal chip. In my hands is the PixelFX Gem, the Retrogem Gem. We got the nice PS2 digital flex. Sealed crystal chip, we're going to crack that open and install it. First time playing with the crystal. One thing I like to do whenever I go into these PS2 Slims is replace the laser flex cable here. Now this one was seems to have already been replaced, but that white tab I was tugging at, those pop off real easy. The same is true for essentially every ribbon cable in the PS2. Blue tabs, whatever it is on the back, the adhesive breaks down. So you pull it up, and you hit it with some Goo Gone. Just like that. Let it soak for a bit, couple minutes, then clean it off with some IPA. Looking real nice. So once it's totally dry, you just come on in, put the replacement in. Another good reason to do this is so the ribbon doesn't scratch your discs, as that can happen over time with these earlier Slims. And we're prepping for the crystal chip install here. Fluxing up the BIOS pads. So I do the crystal chip and the Picfix while I'm in here, and modchip wires are going to be one color, Picfix wires are going to be another. So I was off by one there. I tinned up some pads that didn't need tinning, but that's totally fine. A conical tip would have been a better choice if I really wanted to only tin the proper pads, but some extra tinning. It's no big deal. So we flip the board over. I like routing my wires in towards the middle here. You'll see why later. It's purely an aesthetic thing. And yeah, if you're gonna be doing PS2 mod chips, you know, there's two schools of thought. And you know, my school of thought is, if you're gonna be doing these, make them look nice. You know, you want them. You want to do that wire porn. And then the other school of thought is just wrong and stupid. Just make it look nice. It takes time to get the wiring, the wire prawn stuff down. But you know what? I think it's worth it. It doesn't actually matter for functionality, but it makes it look nice. And if you need to troubleshoot it later, your wires are going to be all nice and tidy. You can see where everything's going, you know. And especially if you're doing a clear shell like this, you want it to look nice. And this one here, you really want to don't tin up or don't have too much exposed lead here. You got those vias nearby, you don't want to bridge them. The one on the right hand side is connected, but the one on the left currently, that is something else. So keep your lead pretty exact on that one, and be mindful of any and all vias. You really want to keep your leads as exact as possible, especially in situations where they might short something like that via there on the left. If it's too long, could touch that. You don't want that to happen. Really important not to have too much exposed wire, shorting stuff out. That's what I would have done there. Trimmed it down a bit. There was too much. I didn't like it. Looking good, nice and taut lead. Another one. That one's a bit more exposed, but there's no vias on the left there for it to short, so it's no big deal. Very nice. So the wires we just did, those were the BIOS wires. Here, these are the drive controller wires. As you can see, I already have the Picfix wires set up. Scrape them off with a little X-Acto knife, and when it works out like this, it is the best way to do it. So we scrape them, we put the wire through the hole, and we tin it just like that. And that is sturdy as fuck. You don't need to go too deep. Just pop the wire in the via, give it a bend so it kind of stays in place. And that one's not enough exposed lead, so the installation is probably going to get a little burnt up here. Yep. So we got it. That was a bit sub-ideal, but that'll do. You want to have a little bit of lead hanging out of the via, so you don't go burning insulation like that. You see, it's fucking with the joint a bit there too. And there we go, we got all of those in. Same story for the other three. This one is the A wire here. It's pulled from this resistor. Feeding a wire through the legs here. I'm going to use the tweezers to wrap it around, and this is for PS1 support here. And the crystal chip has a crystal oscillator on board, hence the name, so that handles the clock signal, so we don't need to worry about it now. You might be seeing this and being like, oh, that's sketchy with that via there. There's continuity with that via, so you can either pull it from the cap, pull it from the via. I'm pulling it from the cap. Totally up to you. But yeah, it might look like it's shorting. It might be shorting, but that is connected, so totally fine. This right here is for power. I like to pull it from this test pad instead of the traditional point in most diagrams. Didn't like that joint, so I reflowed that there. It's time to crack the seal of this nearly 20-year-old mod chip. It's a sexy motherfucker. Look at that. Comes with that dope emblem. We're going to do a little bit of wire pointing here. So you'll notice I have an excess of wire. I don't cut it to length at first. Just make sure there's plenty of extra, so I don't end up with a wire that's too short. That's no good. A bit wasteful, but whatever. Come in, tin all those pads. Now there's this TO pad on this. The diagram didn't call for it. I was talking to Assembler, who was the dev of the crystal chip as well as the DMS3, and he says that is for tray open. He said might as well try wiring it up. I did, and the console would there would be no LED coming from like the standby if both of the lens sensors were enabled on this model. I don't know why. It took me a bit to troubleshoot, but realized once standby was turning on when I opened the tray, that it probably had something to do with tray open. So I didn't connect that one. And you'll also notice there's no reset pad on the crystal chip. It detects when I guess it's from the bit stream, it can detect if there's a reset. So it knows. So that is pretty neat. Now this is that TO point I was talking about, and it causes problems with the Crystal Chip 1.0. The 2.0 uses it. It wasn't working properly for me on this one, and that's probably why it's not wired in the 1.0 diagram for the V12. Here we are doing the wire management, just coming in with some tweezers, snagging, pulling. A lot of this you just learn as you do more of these. You know, kind of got to get in the zone sometimes, laser in, and then you know, once you've worked on a revision, you can kind of probably have it mapped out how you like to do it. Some people like to get creative. I like to get creative on the first time I do a revision, and if I'm happy with what I did, I'll keep doing that, you know. Try to do it as optimal and, you know, nice looking as I can, and then once I feel good with it, I just keep replicating that for that revision. But yeah, this is how I do it. I pull it tight on that left side there, because we've got that one wire on the W line, and then we've got like the longer right angles going on the right side. It all kind of lines up nicely like this. Just train the wires with your fingers best you can. Just kind of get them, train them to go where you want them to go. Use a little bit of elbow grease. Don't stress out joints too much, but these pads here are pretty durable. You don't need to worry about it. Only pads, you know, that you really, you know, you want to be delicate with are like resistors and shit. So like the, I think it's the K point on the Picfix, and then the SX wire for PS1, like up on that capacitor. You don't want to tug on those. So this is Loctite, Loctite gel. This shit is perfect for this. I just put in a little dot. Use some of those precision Q-tips, and you do not want to touch it once it's when it's still wet, because then you get that chalky look. Or put IPA on it, that'll also give you that chalky look. You may have noticed that bag I had there too. That is really useful, just something like that, a Ziploc bag, whatever, if you're trying to route wire over components, like it's not flat on the board. Something like that is super helpful, like this here. I always route these drive controller wires over that component there on the PS2. If there's nothing in between the wires and that component, it just wouldn't be working out. This really helps for training wires like this, locking them in when you're going over components. Just do it piece by piece, you know, glue some up, get it trained, get it routed, glue it up. And don't get glue on the board. That is another good reason to use the bag. You don't want to glue it down to the board. You don't want to glue it down to the other chips. You know, it can happen, but you know, you get super glue on your board, it's not going to be pretty. Here it can cause shorts over time. I've never had that happen, but I've heard tale it can. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but either way, keep super glue off the damn board. Doesn't need to be on there. The wires, just glue the wires. That's all reversible. You know, pull the wires out. Wires are all glued together, not glued to the board, and you're good. Certain scenarios where you want to tack wire to the board, I use UV resin for that. Much less abrasive, but I find it's not as good for this PS2 mod chip kind of work. It's just not strong enough to keep long rows of 38 WG together like this. So yeah, UV resin is really nice for tacking stuff to the board. It's very reversible, it's clean. You can use it, and I have used it for PS2 mod chips, but I think Loctite's where I landed as like the best. Minus, you see there where I touched that bit of glue, that chalkiness you can get. That's not great. It's just stronger. The UV resin, you know, it's just a bit too weak. And then we've got that excess on the wires, which cleans up real well. Well, alright, here we are with the PixelFX Gem install. And this is one of the top side DACs. This is not as difficult as I thought it was going to be for the Flex install. Spacing's pretty mellow. If you've done a DC digital, you're gonna be pretty comfortable with this as well. We need to remove a couple components here. Got these 3 caps. Got 2 more caps here. And a resistor and a cap. Now these are all populated on the Flex. Now as you can see, I tinned up those pins on accident there. It's not a problem. We'll work those out. No problem at all. Just a bit of flux. Clean the tip. Get swipey. Move it along, clean the tip, flux it up, rinse and repeat until you clear it out. And if you're having a hard time, you can always bring in the wick or clean your tip with the wick. And that helps too. A lot of flux. Flux is your friend. And there we go, it's nice and clear. I always like to work it to a corner. And now we're just clearing off these pads with some wick here. Making it nice and flush for that flex cable to sit in. And here we are. I got it reasonably lined up, but I did end up having to realign it. So instead of what I'm doing here, tacking it in at the bottom first, I would recommend tacking it in at the 2 reach around corners as opposed to locking it in from the large end here. Because the alignment on mine ended up being a bit off, I believe, on the left side there. And I didn't care for it much. Ended up reworking it, so if I were to do this again, and I surely will be doing this again, yeah, see, look at that. That alignment is not good. So tack these sides in first. The 4 in the middle are all ground, so those will be short to one another. So that's not a problem if any of those are bridging, but the 2 on the sides, those are, you can see those are all their own traces. Up the second from the right doesn't appear to have a trace coming from it, but yeah, you don't want that shorting to the pins nearby. I'm coming in here with the chisel tip, just kind of flowing it in. Getting nice meaty joints. You don't want to go too high on the temps with flex cables. I believe I was doing this at 315C, but you can go lower than that. There's a lot of recommendations for using unleaded solder, just because the Ps2 uses unleaded solder, but you know what, I would rather, I'd rather use a paper straw. Leaded seemed to work fine. There's a debate to be had on whether or not you should use leaded or unleaded here, but leaded's always worked fine for me. I've done a ton of PS2 mod chips, a lot of switch work, and I've never had an issue. So I go over the joints quite a few times. I want to have nice solid joints. I want all those pads to be good and wet. There's a couple there in the corner that I don't like, that I'm sure I will be going over again. You want a nice meaty joint. Don't worry about bridging. You can work it out very easy with the right tip and a decent amount of flux. It's going to be more difficult for you if you're using unleaded, just because unleaded requires more heat, but flex cables do not like heat, so that is another conundrum there. So the alignment there and on the bottom looks nice, but on the left side it's a bit off. So I've got to come in here. I got to come in here and readjust these. That alignment's not good at all. Alright, it looks like I've gone ahead and done that already. So it's pretty easy to adjust. I guess I didn't film it, but it's just kind of, you heat up the pads and kind of pull up gently as you go. And you want to make sure and use your multimeter in diode mode and touch each pad to the corresponding pads. Make sure there's no bridging, and if there is, make sure there's supposed to be continuity between the pins. This is where it gets dicey. So this design had me very confused until I saw what it's like with these flex cables installed in other slim revisions, and most have the DAC on the bottom, and this is designed for that. And for the V12 with the DAC on top, it doesn't make much sense, and you kind of have to do it like this, and you link those pads that are tinned up there, you link it to the other flex on the other side. So this is the 5-volt line here, right here. We need to pull 5 volts, and we need to pull 3.5 volts from another nearby VM. Now, spoiler alert, I ended up having an issue when I first tested it. So this goes to 5 volts at that top, that weird castellated edge there. And then the other castellated edge is 3.5, which has the thicker trace that you can see there. And yeah, so I had a weird issue when I set everything up. I was getting, my console was booting fine, but the gem wasn't booting at all. There was no life on it. And Dan helped me troubleshoot it, and if it has 3.3 volts, it should boot even without 5, and mine was reading at like 1.6, 1.7, something like that. So it wasn't booting, it was undervolted. So for whatever reason, this connection coming up with the 3 volt line wasn't it wasn't carrying the full 3.3 volts. It was doing about half. Now, it could have been a poor connection on the wire. When I tested the actual pad, it was fine. So, I don't know. So as you can see, I locked this in with UV resin. So if you watch the Macho Nacho video, he's got the exact same board as me that he works on. He did a lot of Captain Tape stuff. I wanted to go with UV resin on this just because the flex cable's pulling up on itself quite a bit. I didn't really care for that, so I wanted to lock the wires to that DAC chip, just so it's not, you know, the most aesthetically pleasing thing, but you really don't want a bunch of you know, tension on your connections, like pulling it up. And Captain Tape is great for insulating stuff, but it's relatively weak. So I went with a bit more reliability with the UV resin here. So this is the connection that caused me problems, and I ended up just jumping this wire like straight to the like the programming fingers on the gem. So this connection here was no good for whatever reason. I don't, maybe the trace got a little fucked up there. It is getting pulled up upon, and this should all be resolved in the I guess in the adapter cable that's coming out for these. As you're going to see, we're going to be wiring this up to connect these 2 flex cables, and soon there's going to be a 3rd flex cable that should resolve that. But yeah, for whatever reason, that wire wasn't pulling enough voltage from a 3 volt line. So this is the other side of the board from the previous flex that we're looking at here. And yeah, this is all your controller points here for the on-screen display. So it's tapping into that. And we gotta do this weird fold. Just like that. Tack it in. That's pretty good. So I tried getting it as perfect as possible. That's pretty good right there. I think it ends up slipping a little bit. Let's see. Yeah, look at that. It was so good, and then it slipped. So it was fine. I'm just, you know, getting anal about it here. That's okay. Yeah, that's good. And this is audio. So this fold is weird. This is a strange one. So I just wanted to get that locked in as quick as possible so I could stop holding it in place and then go through the individual 3 points and clean them up and then get it folded just like this. Nice. And there's the crystal chip and Picfix looking nice in there. And we need to tap into reset. So if you have like any other mod chip, you're also going to be tapped into this point. So you can just pull it from the mod chip itself or have 2 wires coming off the reset pad. It's up to you. Yeah, so I routed it through the legs here. It's actually quite perfect. Maybe not perfect, but pretty good. I'll probably use a bit of UV resin to tack the wire to the board. We're going for that pad on the flex, big square one. There we go, a little UV resin, lock it in place. I like the flex here, 2 to this IC. Might not be necessary, but I don't like it when everything's pulling up. So I used a bit of Captain tape underneath just to insulate it. And now we need to wire from this flex to the other flex. And there will be an additional flex cable coming out, but you know, I don't have it yet. And if you see this in like the designs of these flex cables, certainly seem confusing. I was confused until you see what it looks like when it's installed on pretty much any other Slim with the DAC on the bottom. Makes way more sense. I guess some V12s they're on top, some they're on bottom, and mine's on top, and it's a little weird. It's a little weird because the flex cables were designed for the other ones, but they still work. You just kind of gotta use a little bit of elbow grease here. So we'll get the nice ribbon routing going on. So ladies and gentlemen, the crystal chip was kind of unique in a lot of ways from other mod chips. These came essentially blank. You can't play backups on them or really do anything except for boot up a recovery disk. This is one burn. I'm gonna have the archive link below. And they didn't release the firmware that essentially once you flash the chip with the firmware, it still wouldn't boot backups. That's all disabled. They did that for legal reasons, but it was open sourced so people could modify it and release hacked versions that enables playing backups. So obviously most people are going to want to use the hacked version of the firmware, so you can play your backup PS2 and PS1 discs. And it also has the boot manager bm.elf, which is the crystal chip's operating system essentially. And for the 1.0 it needed to be installed on a memory card, but the later crystal chips, those allowed those had like a 1 or 2 megabyte flash chip that allowed you to install the boot manager directly to the crystal chip, and you can boot it that way. We've got a 1.0, and ultimately I'm not going to be using boot manager. I'm just going to be booting straight to OPL using FreeMcBoot, but the crystal chip will serve the purpose of playing backups and PS1 and region free, all the fun stuff you expect from a PS2 mod chip. But I'm going to go ahead and show you just around the recovery disk here, and then we will take a look at the boot manager. And here we are, ladies and gentlemen. So this is the recovery disk. So we got install boot manager that will install it to the memory card, or if you're lucky enough to have a 2.0, directly to the chip. Upgrade the firmware, so a fresh one like we had. Gotta do that because it has no firmware on it. And if you want to actually be able to play backup discs, you need the hacked firmware versions. And that's about it in here. We've got our system information, boot manager 2.1.6, all of that, test disk, reload menu. Let me show you around the boot manager. And here we are, Crystal Chip's boot manager. So we can boot media. We've got the application browser here. So these need to be in their own specific format. So if we go run USB HDD, and I've gone ahead and I've extracted, there's a mega pack out there of a bunch of apps pre-configured. Now this is like 2007, so we've got a bunch of probably hard to find PS2 homebrew, like PS2 Duck Hunt. Not something I've seen around before. Pretty neat. But yeah, these all have their own scripts associated with them. And they need to be in the right format with the scripts, or else they are not going to show up. And then they need to subsequently be installed, but we can go ahead and load them through here. Now unfortunately, I went ahead and I installed OPL and Toxic OS, and For whatever reason, when OPL was booted from Boot Manager, I was having issues with my MX4 SIO. It would detect the games, but I would freeze on a pink screen every time. So I've got around that. That's why I went with free McBoot and booting into OPL. That way I don't have that issue. That's why I'm ultimately not going to be using the Boot Manager here. So we've got Device Manager, Firmware Manager. We can wipe the card if we want to. Device, install various devices. Memory Card Manager. System Info. And then we've got some more modchip specific configs here. So PS1, tweak it here. We've got a video wizard. Interface configuration. Auto load. The theme manager. Fortunately, I couldn't find any themes. Got our network, so there is FTP here within BM, IGR, etc. So very cool OS, very Winamp looking. It's kind of neat. They went for something different here with the crystal chip, and you know, I appreciate it. Maybe it is partially open source. Maybe maybe someone could port this to a Pico or something, make modern crystal chips. That would be pretty cool. I think this is the only open source PS2 mod chip from back in the day. We'll see. That would be kind of neat. Well, cool. Let me show you. I'm gonna plug in my free McBoot memory card, boot it up, and show you how I ultimately have this guy running. Bring up the Retrogem menu. You hold L1, R1, D-pad right, and circle. From here, check out the presets. Got our scan lines, slot masks, all of this. Whole bunch of stuff. The tweak for now, everything on mine is default, except I've switched the video to 14:9 1080p, and I'm capturing this with my Elgato PCIe. Upgrade the firmware. This is all very much default, and we can play Snake. Oh, that's pretty cool. Oh God, I played this since my old Nokia. Hell yeah. Yeah, so I set mine to widescreen here. Everything else is default. Plenty of options to play with. So if I push start, in here I've set my settings to VGA 480p. Not sure if there's a better setting to choose, but every game I've tested seems to be working. And in OPL, before booting a game, you can hit triangle. Let's see, so whatever we're gonna play, we're gonna check out and do some Tony Hawk Underground. So you can go in here into configure GSM. I'm using the global, but if you want to try tweaking your output, go per game, turn that on, We've got all sorts of options, so you can try booting it in 720p, etc. VGA 600. Let's try it at 600p. Test it. Okay, so that didn't work. So we're on the global settings here. 480p. So the Retrogem introduced somewhat of a controversial decision to do a bit of DRM. So there's the base model, and then there is the shiny version. So I don't know. I think the let's do we'll be Becky. I think they handled the DRM totally fine. So you've got the base version, it's like 100. The shiny version is like 180 if you want to upgrade. You don't need to, like, it's not locked to an account like you've got with Terra Onion and Paseo. You upgrade it and it's totally upgraded. You can switch consoles with it. You know, if you resell it, it's going to still have the shiny version. No bullshit there. So initially when there was like two different, you know, models, I was thinking you were going to have to, it was going to be different hardware, and that would have sucked, because then you'd have to rip it open, switch it out, and I don't think anyone would be complaining if it was different hardware. So really, I'm alright with it. I'll probably be using these with an external scaler anyway, so I'll be likely using the non-shiny versions on a lot of consoles, and I'm really looking forward to the Xbox version. Yeah, I really don't think they're gonna have to do all the crap that the Make Megahertz kit did, where it's got to be only works on like certain patch BIOSes and stuff like that. I want a Xbox kit that you can install, and that's it. It does its job. Digital mod, and you can it's not going to be dependent on a certain BIOS or anything like that. Like, that's what we want. That's what we need for the Xbox, and I'm pretty sure the Retrogem is going to be that. So I'm really looking forward to the Xbox. Really stoked that they got PS2 working finally. We've been waiting for the PS2 digital for years, and now we got it. I'm happy. This is dope. My build is pretty badass, and yeah, I'm fucking stoked. But anyways, dudes, that's the build. That's some Tony Hawk. Becky's eating shit, and thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you on the next one.
Don't let us back, let's say what to do. ModzvilleUSA.